My billionaire husband drove off while I was in labor. He forgot whose name was on everything. Chapter 1, The Driveway. The pain came in the driveway, between the front door and the car, and it was not the kind of pain Renata could think her way around. She had read every book. She had timed the early contractions on her phone for 2 hours, sitting very still at the kitchen counter so she would not panic before there was a reason to. She had a bag packed by the door, navy blue, with the soft folded blanket on top and the little gray hat she had bought when she was 4 months along, and had let herself believe, for the first time, that this was really going to happen. She had done everything a careful person does. And now she stood on the cold concrete of her own driveway with one hand flat on the hood of the car, and she felt the warm rush down her legs, and she understood that her water had broken and the books no longer mattered. Brandon was already in his car. He had a meeting that morning. He had told her about it 3 times in 2 days, the way he did when he wanted something to feel important enough that no one would question it. A counterparty, a portfolio of mid-market hotels, a signing he kept saying could not be moved. He was in the charcoal suit she had bought him for his last birthday, and his hands were on the wheel, and the engine was running, a low patient sound in the quiet morning. Renata knocked on his window with the flat of her hand. He lowered it halfway. "It's happening," she said. Her voice came out steadier than her legs felt. "My water broke. I need to go now. Right now." She watched his face while she said it. She would remember the exact arrangement of it for a long time afterward, because it told her everything she had spent months refusing to know. There was a flicker of something behind his eyes. It was not fear for her. It was not even surprise. It was calculation, fast and cold, the same look he got at a negotiating table when he was deciding how little he could give and still walk away with what he wanted. "Can you call a car?" he said. "Renata. I cannot miss this. You know I cannot miss this. The whole quarter is riding on this signing." She looked at him. The morning was gray and damp. A bird was making noise somewhere in the hedges by the gate. "I am in labor," she said. "With your child." "I know," he said. "I know, and I am sorry about the timing, I truly am. But your mother can meet you there in 10 minutes. Call her. Call the car service, they are fast, I have used them 100 times. I will be there the second this is signed. I promise you. The second." The contraction took her then, and she bent forward until her forehead was nearly against the cold metal of the door, and she breathed the way the class had taught her, in slow through the nose, longer out through the mouth, riding it the way you ride a wave you cannot stop and cannot fight. It went on longer than the ones before it. When it finally let go of her and she could see straight again, the car was already moving. He had raised the window. Through the glass she saw him lift 2 fingers off the steering wheel in a gesture that was almost a wave, the kind of small motion a man makes to someone he expects to see again soon and does not need to think about. The car rolled down the long driveway, slowed at the gate, turned out onto the road, and was gone. The engine sound faded into the ordinary noise of the morning, and then there was nothing but the bird in the hedges and her own breathing. She stood alone in the gray light with her hand on the car and water cooling on her legs. For 3 seconds she let herself feel exactly how alone she was. 3 seconds. She counted them, the way she counted everything. Then she did what she had always done when something was broken and no one was coming to fix it. She solved the problem in front of her. She got the door open. She lowered herself carefully into the driver's seat of her own car, a sedan she had chosen for its safety rating 2 years ago when she was already quietly planning for a child. She put her phone in the holder on the dash. She called her mother on speaker, and Yvonne picked up before the first ring had finished, because Yvonne had been sleeping with the phone on the nightstand for a week. "It's time, Mama," Renata said. "My water broke. I'm driving myself." Brandon left. There was a half-second of silence on the line. In that half-second Renata heard her mother make a decision. She heard Yvonne decide not to ask the question that was sitting right there, "Not now, not while her daughter was behind the wheel. "I am walking out the door this second," Yvonne said. "You drive slow and you breathe. I will beat you to that hospital. I will be standing right at the door when you pull up. Do you hear me? Right at the door." "I hear you," Renata said. She drove the 4 miles with both hands tight on the wheel and her jaw set against the next wave. She made every light, which felt, in the moment, like the only piece of luck the morning was going to give her. She talked to herself out loud the whole way, low and even, the way she talked to a deal that was trying to come apart in a conference room. "You are fine. The baby is fine. You have done harder things than this with less help than this. 1 mile. Breathe through it. 1 more mile. Almost there." The next contraction came at a red light a half-mile out, and she gripped the wheel and breathed and did not let it move her foot off the brake until the light turned. She was a careful driver even in labor. Especially in labor. She pulled up to the emergency entrance, and a nurse was already coming through the automatic doors with a wheelchair, because Yvonne had called ahead from her own car while she drove. And Yvonne was right behind the nurse, parking crooked across 2 spaces and half running across the lot in her good church flats, her coat open and flapping. Her mother reached her before the nurse did. She pulled the car door open and took Renata's face in both her hands, hard, the way she used to when Renata was small and had come home crying about something at school. "I've got you," Yvonne said. "I am right here. I've got you." "Where is he?" "A meeting," Renata said. Yvonne went very still for a moment. She did not say anything to that. She only pressed her lips together until they went pale, and then she helped the nurse lower her daughter into the wheelchair, and she kept one hand on Renata's shoulder the whole way through the sliding doors and down the bright hallway, and she did not take it off. That is where this story turns, in that doorway, with one parent missing and one parent there with her hand on her daughter's shoulder. But to understand why a man would drive away from his own wife in labor, and why that man had just made the single worst mistake of his comfortable life, you have to go back. You have to know who Renata was before she was anyone's wife. You have to know whose name was on the building Brandon thought he ran, on the deeds he believed he controlled, on the company he had been quietly, carefully trying to make his own. Brandon Calloway believed, all the way down, that he was the most important person in his own life. He was about to find out how wrong a man can be. Chapter 2, The Founder. Renata Hayes bought her first building when she was 27 years old, and she had to ask for the loan 3 times before a bank said yes. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother. Yvonne cleaned offices at night, after the workers went home, pushing a cart down dark carpeted hallways, and during the day she kept the books for a corner pharmacy and a dry cleaner and anyone else who would pay her to make their numbers honest. From her mother, Renata learned 2 things early, and they shaped everything that came after. The first was that numbers do not lie if you read all of them. Not the top line that a person wants you to see. All of them. The small ones at the bottom, the footnotes, the line that does not match the line above it. Yvonne could find the one wrong number in a page of right ones the way some people can hear one off note in a choir. The second thing Renata learned was harder and quieter. The person who signs the lease is not always the person who owns the building. Yvonne said it to her more than once, standing in some office she was cleaning that belonged to a man whose name was on the door but not on the deed. It pays, Yvonne said, to always know the difference between the two. Renata studied finance and then real estate. She worked 5 years for a development firm and watched how money actually moved through property. How a tired building in a good location could be bought cheap, fixed with patience instead of flash, and turned into something that paid for itself and then paid for the next one. She saved everything she could. She read the law on her own time, not to practice it but to never be surprised by it. She made one true friend in those years, a young attorney named Camille Boyd, who was as careful as Renata was and twice as quick on her feet, and who would still be standing beside her 15 years later in a very different room. When she was 27, Renata bought a failing extended stay hotel near a hospital district. It was the kind of place where families stayed when someone they loved was sick and far from home, when they needed somewhere cheap and clean to sleep between long days at a bedside. The previous owner had let it rot. Renata did not gut it and flip it for a quick return. She made it good. Clean rooms, calm colors, fair prices, a front desk that knew that the people walking in were often having the worst week of their lives. It filled up. People told other people. Within 2 years she bought a second property. Within 5 she had a small portfolio and a name for it. She called the company Hayes Meridian. Hayes was her mother's name as much as her own. A meridian was the highest point the sun reaches in a single day, the moment when it is exactly where it is meant to be, and Renata intended to keep climbing toward it. She built the company the right way, which is to say the careful way, the Yvonne way. Every property sat inside the holding company. The holding company had one majority owner, and that owner was Renata Hayes, in her own name, free and clear. The deeds were held in the company's name. The trademarks, the brand, the operating systems she had designed for running the properties well, all of it belonged to the company, and the company belonged to her. Camille drafted the structure from the ground up, and Camille did not leave loose ends. There was nothing in it that could be picked apart later by a clever lawyer, because a clever lawyer had built it. Renata met Brandon Calloway at a hospitality conference when she was 33. He was a regional executive for a national hotel chain, tall and easy in a room, the kind of man who remembered the name of everyone's assistant and the score of last night's game. He made her laugh, which was not an easy thing to do, because Renata had spent her whole life watching people and was hard to surprise. He listened when she talked about the work, or did a very good impression of listening. He told her she was the most impressive person he had ever met, and he said it looking right at her, and for a while she let herself believe it was simply true. They married 18 months later in a small ceremony. Yvonne came in a deep blue dress and smiled all day and danced with the groom and watched him the entire time the way she watched a sky that might turn before evening. After the wedding, Brandon wanted into the company. Not as an employee, he said. As a partner. As family. He had the experience and the relationships and the polish for exactly the rooms Renata did not enjoy sitting in. She thought about it for a full month, turning it over the way she turned over any decision that could not be undone. Then she made a choice that she believed at the time was generous, and that she would later understand much more clearly. She gave Brandon the title of Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Meridian. He would be the face. He would run the meetings he loved, court the lenders, stand on the stages at the conferences and shake the hands. He would draw a strong salary and a bonus tied to the company's growth. He would have the title on the door, on the car, on the reservation at the restaurant. What she did not give him was ownership. The majority of the company stayed in her name. Not joint. Not in a marital trust. Hers. Brandon received a title and a small grant of equity that vested slowly over 5 years, and a position that, like every chief executive's position, served at the pleasure of the board. Camille wrote it exactly that way, and Renata signed it exactly that way, and she did not do it because she distrusted Brandon then. She did it because her mother had taught her, in a dark office a long time ago, the difference between the person who signs the lease and the person who owns the building. Brandon never read the documents closely. He signed where the little colored flags pointed, the way busy important men sign things their assistants hand them. He liked the title and the car and the table. And he came to believe, the way a person can come to believe a thing simply by repeating it to himself enough times, that the company was his. That he had built it. That the engine under all of it ran on him. For 3 years, the arrangement worked. Renata ran the engine and Brandon ran the room, and Hayes Meridian grew steadily and well. Then 2 things happened in the same season. Renata learned she was pregnant. And Brandon brought a sharp young junior partner named Dominique Carr into the firm. The sky her mother had been watching for years finally began to turn. Chapter 3, The Cracks. Yvonne saw it before Renata did, which was usually the way of things between them. She had come to stay for the last 2 months of the pregnancy, settling into the guest room with the good morning light, and she did in that house what she did everywhere. She watched. She watched how people stood when they thought no one was keeping count. Who reached for whose coffee without asking. Who laughed a half-beat too long at a joke that was not that funny. Yvonne had spent decades reading rooms full of people who assumed the woman emptying the trash could not see them, and she missed almost nothing. Dominique Carr came to the house twice in the first week Yvonne was there. She was sharp and glossy and very quick with a compliment, the kind that landed just slightly too easily. She called Brandon by a shortened version of his name that Renata had never once heard him allow anyone to use. She brought documents that could plainly have been emailed. She stayed for dinner one of those nights, uninvited and unbothered by it, and she sat in the chair at the table that was usually Renata's. When Renata came in from the other room, heavy and slow at 8 months along, Dominique was a half-second late getting up out of it. Yvonne noticed the half-second. Yvonne noticed everything about the half-second. That young woman from the firm, Yvonne said a few evenings later, drying a dish she had already dried once, standing at the sink with her back to her daughter. Dominique. How long has she been around now? About 6 months, Renata said. Brandon brought her in for the new acquisitions. She's good on paper. Yvonne said. She set the dry dish down on the dry dishes and picked up another that did not need drying, and she said nothing else, which from Yvonne was an entire paragraph with a conclusion at the end of it. After that, Renata started watching too. It was like the way you start hearing a small sound in a car only after someone else points it out, and then you cannot stop hearing it, and you wonder how you ever drove around not hearing it at all. Brandon's calls began running late and moving to other rooms. He had always taken his calls in front of her. Now he stepped out onto the patio and slid the glass door shut behind him, and through it she could see him laughing, his head tipped back, easy. A regional conference that was supposed to be 2 nights became 4. When Renata, mildly curious, looked up the conference schedule on her phone, it ended on the 2nd day. He came home from it with color in his face and a smooth story about extended side meetings that had run long. She did not accuse him of anything. That was not how she worked, and it was not what would help her. She gathered. The thing that moved her from suspicion to certainty was small and ordinary, the way those things almost always are. A statement for the company credit card came to her inbox, because her name was on that account, because it was her company. She read it the way she read everything, top to bottom, every line. And there it was. A hotel charge, in the same city they both lived in, at a very nice hotel. 2 nights. A weekend she had spent at home with swollen ankles and a foot propped on a pillow and a baby kicking steadily at her ribs, a weekend Brandon had said he was spending at a property 2 states away. The room had been charged to the company card. So had a dinner for 2 the first night. So had a bottle of wine that cost more than Yvonne used to earn in a week of nights pushing a cart. Renata sat with the statement open on her laptop for a long time. The house was quiet. Yvonne had gone to bed. Out on the patio, through the dark glass, she could see Brandon's shape, the glow of his phone lighting his face from below. She felt a great many things in that stretch of quiet. Under all of them, cold and clear and almost calming, she felt the founder waking up inside her. The part of her that read all the numbers, not just the top line. The part that knew, from a long time ago, the difference between the person who signs the lease and the person who owns the building. She picked up her phone and called Camille. It was late, but Camille answered, because friends of 15 years answer. I need you to pull everything, Renata said, keeping her voice low and even. The operating agreement. The deeds. The trademark filings. The bylaws. The board terms. Brandon's employment paper, his equity grant, his work for hire agreement. All of it. I want it in front of me by the end of the week. There was a pause on the line. Camille could hear what lived underneath a sentence. Talk to me, she said. What happened? I think my husband is having an affair with one of the partners at my firm, Renata said. A woman named Dominique Carr. And I think he has been using the company to pay for it. I am not certain of the second part yet. I will be by Friday. And you are due in, Camille said carefully. 5 weeks, Renata said. Camille was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again her voice had changed. The friend who hurt for Renata stepped back, and the lawyer who worked for her came forward. All right, Camille said. Here is exactly what we do, and the first rule is that we do nothing in a hurry and nothing in anger. Nothing emotional on paper, nothing emotional in a text, nothing he could ever read out loud in a courtroom. You behave precisely the way you have been behaving. You let that man keep believing the most important person in his life is still himself. You smile at breakfast. And in the meantime, I read every single document you have ever signed, and we find out exactly what ground you are standing on, down to the last inch of it. By the time that baby arrives, you will know your position completely. That is why I called you, Renata said. I know it is, Camille said, and her voice softened just for a second. Now go to sleep. You are building a whole entire person in there. Let me do the reading. Renata closed the laptop. Out on the patio, Brandon was still laughing at something on his phone, his head tipped back, relaxed, a man who believed without question that the ground beneath his feet belonged to him. It did not. It never had. Chapter 4, The Paper. Camille came to the house on a Thursday with a worn leather folder and a face that gave nothing away to anyone except Renata, who could read it like a balance sheet across a room. They sat up at the dining table. Yvonne took her time in the kitchen, close enough to hear, far enough to let them work, the way she had positioned herself in important rooms her whole life. Brandon was at the office. Dominique was, presumably, wherever Brandon was that day. I read all of it, Camille said. Twice. I want to walk you through what you already know, out loud, because with everything else happening you need to hear the ground under you spoken in plain words. Walk me through it, Renata said. Camille opened the folder and laid the documents out in order, the way Renata laid out a deal. Hayes Meridian Holdings, she said, and tapped the first page. Majority owner, Renata Hayes. 68% of the equity, held in your name alone. Not joint. Not in any marital trust. You funded and founded this company before the marriage. There is an argument the divorce lawyers will have about the increase in value during the marriage, and we will win most of it, but the ownership itself is clean, and it is yours. Nobody takes it. Renata nodded once. She had known. It was still good to hear in her friend's voice. The properties, Camille continued. Every single deed sits in a subsidiary, and every subsidiary is owned by the holding company. Not by Brandon. Not jointly. The company owns the buildings, and you own the company. The brand, the Hayes Meridian name and the marks, registered to the company, which means to you. The operating software your team built, the systems that actually run the properties day to day, owned by the company under work-for-hire agreements that you had every employee sign on their first day. Including Brandon, Renata said. Including Brandon, Camille said, and let herself almost smile for 1 second. He signed a work-for-hire agreement his first day, the same as the front desk staff. Anything he develops for this company belongs to this company. He never read it. He had me notarize it between 2 other meetings and he was checking his phone the whole time. Men with titles almost never read the paper. They think the title is the power. What does he actually hold? Renata asked. When you strip the title away. The title of chief executive, which serves at the pleasure of the board. A strong salary. A bonus formula tied to growth. And an equity grant of 4%, vesting over 5 years, of which he is currently vested in roughly 2.5%. That part is real, and absent misconduct he would keep what has vested. Camille turned a page. Which brings me to the part one want you sitting down for, except you are already sitting, so. The board. The board, Renata repeated. You wrote it small. 3 seats. You hold one. Harold Pierce holds one as chair, and Harold has been loyal to you since before Brandon Calloway existed in your life. The third is an independent seat, held by Francis Okonkwo, a retired hospitality executive who reads every packet cover to cover and votes the company's interest and nothing else. Brandon does not sit on this board, Renata. He never asked to. He assumed the title was enough, that the chief executive must of course outrank some little 3-person board. But the board controls the chief executive. And you control the board. The kitchen had gone quiet. Yvonne was standing in the doorway now with a dish towel in both hands. Tell her the rest, Yvonne said. Camille glanced at Renata, asking with her eyes. Say it, Renata said. There is a provision, Camille said, that you and I wrote together 4 years ago, that Brandon signed without reading, the same as everything else. Any officer who uses company assets for personal benefit without board approval, or who commits the company to an obligation above a stated dollar threshold without the owner's written authorization, can be removed for cause. And removal for cause has teeth. The unvested equity is forfeited entirely. The vested equity can be repurchased by the company at the original grant price. Which is pennies on the dollar. Renata sat with it. Somewhere inside her the baby shifted, a slow heavy roll under her ribs, as though it were listening too. He paid for a hotel weekend on the company card, Renata said quietly. And a dinner. And a bottle of wine. If that is true, and you can document it, that is personal benefit drawn from company assets without approval, Camille said. That is cause, right there, on its own. But Renata, hear me. We do not move on a single hotel bill. A hotel bill is a story he can spin into an honest mistake, a card he grabbed by accident. We do not give him a story he can survive. We build a record. We let him keep being exactly who he is, and we quietly write down everything he does, every charge, every commitment, every lie, until the picture is so complete and so clear that no one sitting in that boardroom can look at it and look away. We move once. We move clean. And we move after the baby. After the baby, Renata agreed. Always after the baby, Camille said. First you deliver that child. You hold her. You sleep when you can. You let your body come back to you. The company is not going anywhere, because the company is yours, and the man who thinks it is his cannot sell a single brick of it without a signature he is never, ever going to get from you. Renata looked down at the document spread across her own dining table, at her own name printed in clean black letters on page after page after page. Hayes. Hayes. Hayes Meridian Holdings. Owner, Renata Hayes. He drove away from a conference once and lied to me about which days, she said. A man who does that with a weekend will do something much bigger with the company. Men like that always reach for something bigger the moment they decide no one is reading the small things. Then we read the small things, Camille said. And we wait for the big one. And we will not have to wait long. Yvonne crossed the kitchen and stood behind her daughter's chair and put both hands on Renata's shoulders, firm and warm. You always were the one who read all the numbers, she said. You taught me how, Renata said. I taught you the half of it, Yvonne said. The rest you taught yourself, in rooms I never got to sit in. Now finish reading. And have that baby first. Chapter 5, The Delivery. Now back to the hospital, where the whole story had been pointing from the first gray morning. Renata labored for 11 hours. Dr. Patrice Lambert had been delivering babies for 19 years and had a voice that made a room feel as if it had a solid floor under it, no matter how thin the moment got. She came in every hour, checked what needed checking, and each time she told Renata the plain truth, which was the only thing Renata had ever wanted from anyone. You are doing this exactly right, Dr. Lambert said somewhere around the 9th hour, her hand cool and certain on Renata's arm. You are strong, and this baby is strong, and the two of you are working together. It will not be much longer now. I will not lie to you and say it will be easy. I will tell you it is going the way it should go. That is all I want, Renata said through her teeth, riding the edge of another contraction. The truth. Every time. Then you will get it from me, the doctor said. Every time. Yvonne never left the room. She stood at Renata's right side the entire 11 hours and held her hand and wiped her daughter's face with a cool cloth and told her stories to give her something to hold on to besides the pain. She told her about her own labor, 36 years before, in a hospital across the city, alone too, because some men leave in every generation and some women carry on without them anyway. She did not tell it bitterly. She told it like a fact that had been lived through and survived and turned, eventually, into something worth telling. My mother wasn't there for me when I had you, Yvonne said, smoothing the damp hair back from Renata's forehead. She was gone by then. And your father, well. You know about your father. So I did it by myself, in a room a lot like this one. But here is the thing I want you to hold tonight. I am here for you. And you are going to be here for this one. That is how the chain breaks. It breaks where you decide it breaks. You hear me. You decide where it stops. Renata gripped her mother's hand through the last long hour and pushed when Dr. Lambert told her to push and rested when she was told to rest, and at 22 minutes past 9 in the evening, her daughter was born into the bright quiet room. She was small and furious and entirely perfect, with a surprising amount of dark hair and a cry that filled the space and rang off the walls. Dr. Lambert laid her on Renata's chest, slick and warm and impossibly real, and Renata looked down at her and felt something rearrange itself permanently at the very center of her life. Everything that had been important an hour ago took one step back. This took the front. Hello, Renata said softly, her voice cracking on the word. Hello there. I'm your mother. I've got you. I have got you, and I am not going anywhere. She named the baby Simone. After no one. She had thought about family names, but in the end she wanted her daughter to be the first of her own name, the start of something rather than the echo of it. Yvonne cried then, finally, after 11 dry hours of being the strong one. She cried quietly, with her hand pressed over her mouth, looking down at her daughter and her granddaughter, 2 generations of women who had each done this hard thing without the man who should have been there. Brandon was not in the room. He had texted twice across the long day. The first text came around noon, asking how it was going and noting that the meeting was running long. The second came in the early evening, saying the meeting had hit a snag and he would come the moment it wrapped up. Renata had answered neither. There had been nothing she wanted to put in a text, and she had been somewhat occupied bringing a person into the world. He arrived the next morning, at 9 o'clock, after Simone had already had her first night of life, after Renata had already learned the exact weight of her in the crook of her arm, after Yvonne had slept 4 broken hours in the vinyl chair and woken to feed her daughter applesauce from a little plastic cup. He came in with flowers. Deep red roses, 2 dozen of them, clearly expensive. He had a warm smile ready and a smooth story ready to go with it. The deal had been brutal, he said. The counterparty had played games until the last minute. He was so sorry about the timing, he said it 3 times, so sorry, so sorry. He looked down at the baby in Renata's arms and said all the right words, beautiful, perfect, look at her, she has your everything, and he reached out to hold her. Renata let him hold his daughter. She watched him do it, carefully, the way she watched everything now. She waited to feel something move in her chest toward him, some pull of the old feeling. Nothing moved. The absence of it was so complete that it surprised her. The part of her that had loved Brandon had not died in a blaze of anger. It had simply finished, the way a fever finishes, quietly, in the night, leaving her clear and cool and very wide awake. How did the signing go? She asked him, in a pleasant, mild voice, watching his face. Something crossed it. A small hesitation. We are close, he said. A few more days and it will be done. She said. In exactly her mother's tone. In the corner, Yvonne looked up sharply from her phone. met her daughter's eyes for one private second, and then looked back down to hide her face. Brandon stayed about an hour. He had calls, he said. He kissed Simone's small forehead and squeezed Renata's hand and promised the nursery would be completely finished by the time they brought her home, as though a finished nursery were the thing that had been missing from that delivery room. When he was gone, Yvonne came and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, next to her daughter and the sleeping baby. "You are not going to scream at him," she said. It was not a question. She already knew the answer. "No," Renata said, looking down at Simone's face. "Screaming is for people who do not have a better option. And you have a better option." "I have the only kind that lasts," Renata said. "I have the paper. And I have time. He gave me both without ever knowing he was handing them over." Chapter 6, The Quiet Plan. They came home 3 days later to a nursery that was, in fact, finished. Brandon had painted it a soft green, or paid someone to, with a white crib and a white dresser and a rocking chair set by the window where the afternoon light came in. He stood in the doorway when Renata carried the baby in, waiting to be thanked. Renata thanked him. She had decided weeks before that until she was ready to move, she would give him nothing to react to, nothing to brace against. A man who feels safe gets careless. A man who feels suspected gets careful and starts covering his tracks. She needed him careless. So she admired the green walls and the little folded blankets and let him feel like a man who had done a good thing. The first month belonged entirely to Simone. Renata fed her and walked the floor with her at 3 in the morning and slowly learned the difference between her cries, the hungry one and the tired one and the one that meant nothing was wrong and the baby only wanted to be held. Yvonne stayed and ran the household so that Renata could heal and her body could find its way back to her. Dr. Lambert checked her at 2 weeks and again at 6 and pronounced her recovering well, stronger than expected, and told her, in her plain way, to keep resting and to call if anything at all felt off. But Renata was also working, in the margins, in the quiet hours, in the spaces between feedings. She and Camille spoke every few days on a phone Camille had given her, a line Brandon knew nothing about. They built the record, brick by brick. Camille had quietly pulled 18 months of company card statements and flagged every charge that did not belong on a company card. The weekend at the nice hotel had not been the only one. There were 4 of them, spread across the year. There were dinners for 2 at restaurants Renata had never been taken to. There was a weekend rental at the shore in the off-season. There was a piece of jewelry from a boutique downtown, a charge that had never once appeared as anything Renata had worn. Each charge, on its own, was small enough that Brandon had clearly assumed no one would ever bother to read down that far. Set side by side, in order, with dates, they made a picture that no boardroom could pretend not to see. And there was more, the bigger thing Camille had warned would come. In the most recent quarter, Brandon had signed 2 letters of intent committing Hayes Meridian to large acquisitions. The mid-market hotel portfolio was the largest of them, the very deal he had driven away from his laboring wife to chase. In those letters he had described himself as the principal of the company, representing that he held the authority to commit Hayes Meridian to purchases worth tens of millions of dollars. He did not hold that authority. The letters were aggressive, and they were a lie, and they were exposure. He told the counterparty he could sign, Camille said over the secure line one evening while Simone slept against Renata's shoulder. He cannot sign. When they get to the closing table and ask for the owner's written authorization, the entire thing stops dead. He has spent months writing checks with your hand, Renata, and your hand was never once going to move. That is the deal he left me for, Renata said quietly. That is the deal he left you alone in a driveway for, Camille said. A deal he was structurally never able to close. He just did not know it, because he never read the paper that told him so. Renata was quiet for a while, listening to her daughter breathe. I want to talk to Harold, she said. Harold Pierce had been one of the earliest investors in Hayes Meridian and had served as chair of its small board for 6 years. He was 58, plain-spoken, a man who had made money and lost it and made it back, and who in all that respected exactly one thing in business, which was the person who had actually built the thing in front of him. He had backed Renata when she was a founder with a single-tired hotel and a binder of projections, and in all the years since he had never once confused the title on the office door with the person who owned the building behind it. She met him for coffee on a weekday morning, Simone in the carrier against her chest, 6 weeks old and sleeping through it all. She told him everything, in order, the way she would lay out a deal. The driveway. The card statements, all 4 hotels, the dinners, the jewelry. The unauthorized letters of intent and the false representation of authority. The affair with Dominique. She said it all out plainly and let the documents do most of the talking. Harold listened the whole way through without interrupting once. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the sleeping baby for a long moment, and then he looked at her. "I have sat on a lot of boards," he said. "I have removed a lot of executives in my time. So let me tell you the truth the way you have just told it to me. A man who uses the company card to take a woman to a hotel while his wife is at home pregnant, that man is a fool, and fools embarrass a company. But the board does not remove a man for being a faithless husband. That is your business, and the divorce courts. What the board removes a man for is being a danger to the company itself. And a man who commits tens of millions of company dollars he has no authority to commit, who tells a counterparty he is the principal when he is a salaried employee, that man is a danger. He has handed us both kinds at once. The second kind is the one that will carry the room." "I know," Renata said. "I built the provision that says so." "You always did know the difference," Harold said. "Here is what I will do, and I will do it when you are ready and not one day before. When you say the word, I will call a board meeting. You will present what you have just shown me. I will move to remove for cause and I will vote for it. Francis will follow the evidence, because Francis always follows the evidence and the evidence here is a flood. And then, Renata, you will take your own company back, all the way, and you will run it the way you built it, with the title finally matching the truth." Simone stirred against her chest and settled again with a small sigh. "I will be ready soon," Renata said. "I wanted to give my daughter 1 month where the only thing in the house was love and not a war. She has had it. Now I go to work." Chapter 7, The Deal He Missed. Brandon's deal died on a Tuesday, and he never fully understood why, because he had never read the documents that would have explained it to him. The mid-market hotel portfolio, the deal he had chased for months, the deal he had driven away from his laboring wife to be at, finally reached the closing table. Months of his charm and his late dinners and his easy promises had brought it there. The counterparty's lawyers had drawn up the final purchase documents. Brandon had assured everyone in the process, repeatedly and with great confidence, that he was the principal of Hayes Meridian and that his signature alone would bind the company to the deal. At the closing, the counterparty's lead attorney asked one simple, ordinary question. She asked to see the corporate authorization, the document from Hayes Meridian Holdings empowering Brandon Calloway to commit the company to a purchase of this size. There was no such document. There had never been one. Brandon said he would have it produced by the end of the day. He stepped out and called the office. He called the company's general counsel, who was Camille, and Camille told him, politely, calmly, and on the record, that a commitment of this size required the written authorization of the majority owner under the operating agreement, that no such authorization existed, and that she was not in a position to produce a document she had not been instructed by the owner to produce. So Brandon called Renata. She was home, with Simone asleep on her shoulder, a burp cloth over the deep blue robe she was wearing. She let it ring twice before she answered. "I need you to sign something," he said. No greeting, no warmth, the charm stripped away to the thin sharp voice of a man who has just felt the floor drop out from under him. "The portfolio deal. They are asking for owner authorization at the table. It is a formality. I need it today. This afternoon. I am home with the baby," Renata said pleasantly, rocking slightly so Simone would stay asleep. "What is the deal, exactly? Walk me through it." There is no time to walk you through the whole thing, he said, and she could hear him moving, pacing. Renata. This is the biggest acquisition the company has ever attempted. I have been building it for months. They need the authorization today or it falls apart on the table. You have been building it for months, she said. And in all those months you never once brought it to the owner to look at. A silence opened on the line. She could almost hear him reaching for the word. You are the owner, he said slowly, as though he were turning the idea over for the first time in his life. But I am the chief executive. The chief executive who needs the owner's signature to commit the company past a certain size, she said. Yes. I know. I wrote it that way myself, years ago. Send me the full deal package, the diligence file, the financing terms, the whole thing. I will review it the way I review everything, carefully and completely, and I will tell you in a reasonable amount of time whether I am willing to put my company at risk for it. They will not wait for a careful review, he said, his voice rising now. Renata, they will walk away. Then they will walk, she said. A deal that cannot survive due diligence by the actual owner was never a deal worth signing. You learned that from me, Brandon. You were standing right next to me when I taught it to your whole team. You just were not listening, because you thought the lesson was for them and not for you. The deal walked. The counterparty, badly spooked by a chief executive who had represented authority he plainly did not hold, ended the conversation entirely and let it be known, in the small connected world of regional hospitality, that Brandon Calloway had promised what he could not deliver. That kind of talk follows a man. Brandon came home that night with his jaw set and his eyes going everywhere in the room except to her face. He poured himself a drink and stood at the kitchen window with his back to her. You could have signed it, he said finally, not turning around. You let it die just to make a point to me. I let it wait so that I could read it, she said evenly. That is not making a point. That is the job. The job you took the title for and then never actually did, not once, in 3 years. He turned around to look at her then, and for a moment she saw it again, the same fast cold calculation she had seen through the car window in the driveway. He was reassessing her in real time. He was beginning, far too late, to understand that he had badly misjudged the woman he had married, that the quiet careful person who never raised her voice had been holding something the whole time that he had never bothered to see. What is going on with you, he said. You are different. I had a baby, Renata said. 6 weeks ago. By myself. In a hospital, after my husband drove away from me in our own driveway while I was in labor. A great many things have become clear to me since then. The kitchen was very quiet. Simone, in the other room, slept on. Renata, he started, taking a step toward her. Don't, she said, gently, without any heat in it at all. There is nothing you can say standing in this kitchen that is better than what the documents already say sitting in a folder. Good night, Brandon. She went down the hall to the green nursery and lifted her sleeping daughter out of the white crib and sat in the rocking chair by the window with her, in the dark, and she did not cry. She was past the crying part of this. She had a board meeting to prepare for, and she intended to walk into it ready. Chapter 8, The Board. Harold called the board meeting for a Wednesday morning, 8 weeks after Simone was born. It was held in the main conference room of Hayes Meridian's offices, a room Renata had designed herself, with tall windows that filled it with cool clear light and a long table she had chosen from a catalogue 4 years earlier. 3 board seats. Renata in one. Harold, as chair, in the second. And in the third, the independent director, a retired hospitality executive named Frances Okonkwo, a woman who had served the company faithfully for 6 years and who read every page of every packet she was ever handed. Brandon was asked to attend in his capacity as chief executive. He arrived in his good navy suit, a little wary, because a board meeting he had not scheduled and did not control was an unfamiliar and unwelcome thing. Dominique was not in the room. Dominique was, at that very hour, sitting at her glass desk 2 floors below, entirely unaware that the structure she had bet her career on was about to come apart above her head. Camille attended as the company's counsel. She set a thick bound report down in front of each director, squaring the edges. Renata had her own copy, though she did not need it. She had written most of what was in it. Harold opened the meeting. "This is a special meeting of the board of Hayes Meridian Holdings," he said, his voice flat and certain. "We are convened to consider the conduct of the chief executive and the question of his continued service to the company. Renata, as majority owner and as a director, has prepared a presentation. Brandon, you will be given a full and fair opportunity to respond to everything that is said. Renata, the floor is yours." Brandon's eyes moved across the table to his wife. Renata stood. She wore a deep emerald suit that morning, structured at the shoulders, a color her mother had told her on the phone the night before to wear, because, Yvonne said, it looks like someone who has already won and is only here to sign the papers. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She did not need volume. She had the documents. "Thank you, Harold," she said. "I am going to present 3 things this morning. The board can decide what they add up to." She presented the first thing. The unauthorized commitments. The 2 letters of intent in which Brandon had represented himself as the principal of the company. The mid-market portfolio deal that had collapsed at the closing table when no owner authorization could be produced. The reputational damage in the market, already spreading. The legal exposure the company now carried to a counterparty that had relied, to its cost, on a representation of authority that was simply false. She put each document up on the screen at the end of the room and let the room read it in silence. She presented the second thing. 18 months of company credit card statements, with the personal charges flagged in clean red boxes. The 4 hotel weekends, dated. The dinners for 2. The shore rental. The piece of jewelry. Each one a use of company assets for personal benefit, none of them approved by the board, every one of them in plain violation of the officer conduct provision Brandon had signed his first day on the job. She did not say Dominique's name in that room. She did not need to. The charges named her by their nature, and Francis Okonkwo, who missed nothing in any packet, understood completely and made a small precise note on her pad. She presented the third thing last, and it was the shortest. A single page on the screen. The officer conduct provision. The clawback provision. The clause, signed in ink by Brandon Calloway, that permitted removal for cause and forfeiture of unvested equity for exactly the conduct the first 2 presentations had just documented in detail. Then she sat back down, folded her hands on the table, and waited. "Brandon," Harold said. "Your response." Brandon stood. The charm came up like a reflex, the warm smile, the open hands, the leaning posture he used to win a room. He spoke about pressure, and timing, and the real cost of building a company in a hard market. He said the letters of intent were aggressive but well within the normal practice of deal-making. He said the personal charges were oversights, honest mistakes, and that he would gladly repay every dollar of them today. He said he had given years of his life and his energy to this company and that he loved it. He spoke smoothly and at length. He had always been able to speak. When he finally finished, Francis Okonkwo set down her pen and asked exactly one question. "Mr. Calloway," she said, in the unhurried voice of a woman who had sat through many such speeches. "When you signed those letters of intent, representing yourself as the principal of this company, did you have the authority under the operating agreement to commit the company to those purchases? I am not asking what you believed. I am asking what you had. Yes or no?" Brandon hesitated. The smile flickered. "I believed I had the authority of my office," he said. "That is not what I asked you," Francis said, still perfectly calm. "Did you have the authority? Yes, or no?" The room waited. The cool light came through the tall windows. "No," Brandon said. Francis Okonkwo nodded once, slowly, and wrote a final line on her pad. Then I have what I need, she said. Chapter 9, The Removal. The vote took 4 minutes. Harold called it formally, reading the motion from the page in front of him. The motion was to remove Brandon Calloway as Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Meridian Holdings, for cause, effective immediately, with forfeiture of all unvested equity and repurchase of his vested equity at the original grant price, as expressly provided in the agreements he had signed. Harold voted in favor. Renata voted in favor. Francis Okonkwo, who followed the evidence wherever it led, voted in favor. It was unanimous. Brandon sat very still while it happened, both hands flat on the table. He looked at Renata across the long table she had chosen, in the room she had designed, in the cool clear light that filled it, and she watched the understanding finally arrive in him. Not on paper this time. In his actual life. He understood, all at once and far too late, the one thing he had never bothered to learn in 5 years of putting his name on a title and his hands on a steering wheel and driving away from whatever he found inconvenient. He understood, at last, whose name was on everything. You planned this, he said quietly. It was almost an accusation and almost a question. No, Renata said. I built this, years before I ever met you. You planned the rest of it entirely by yourself. The card. The hotels. The deal you could not close. The driveway. I only read what you wrote, and then I wrote it down. Camille slid a folder across the polished table toward him. These are the terms of your separation from the company, she said. They are more generous than the cause finding requires, which is a courtesy extended to you by the owner and not an obligation owed to you by anyone. You will return all company property, including the card and the car, which belongs to the company and not to you. You will not contact employees of the firm regarding company matters. Any future communication will be directed through me. Brandon did not pick up the folder. And the marriage, he said. My divorce attorney will contact yours this week, Renata said. That is a different table entirely. But I will tell you one thing now, so that you are not surprised twice in a single morning. You signed a prenuptial agreement before the wedding, also drafted by Camille, also unread by you. It keeps the company and its growth as my separate property. You will leave the marriage in roughly the condition you entered it. You will keep what was always yours. You will not be taking anything that was mine, because none of it was ever going to be yours. Not for one day. 2 floors below, at very nearly that same hour, Dominique Carr was being informed that her partnership was being dissolved. It had been structured, like everything in the company, to serve the company first, and the company had now determined that she no longer served it. Her system access was cut. Her active projects were quietly reassigned to the people who had done the real work on them all along. Within the month she was gone from the firm, and then from the city, and Renata never spoke to her again, not then and not after. There was nothing to say. The two of them had never had anything between them but Brandon, and Brandon was no longer anything to either of them. There would be no shared future, no lingering thread, no second collision down the road. That door was simply closed. Brandon stood up from the table. For a moment Renata thought he might reach for something cruel, the way a cornered man grabs at the last thing he has within reach. But he had nothing left to grab. He had spent his entire power on charm, and charm does not work on a balance sheet, and it does not work on a unanimous board, and it does not work on a woman who has already finished loving you and has the documents to prove she was right to stop. Goodbye, Brandon, Renata said. She said it the way a person closes a ledger at the end of a long year. Even. Final. Done. He left. Harold walked him to the elevator, not out of any tenderness but to be certain that he actually left the floor, and then came back and lowered himself heavily into his chair and let out a long breath through his nose. Well, Harold said. That is the cleanest removal I have sat through in 30 years of doing this. You handed us a record with no holes in it anywhere. Nothing for a lawyer to crawl through later. Nothing for a sympathetic story to grow in. I had help, Renata said, and looked at Camille. You had paper, Camille said. And you had the good sense, 4 years ago, to make the paper tell the truth before there was any trouble to make it tell. That part was all you. Frances Okonkwo gathered her things and paused by Renata's chair on her way out. She held out her hand. I have served on this board for 6 years, she said. All that time, I assumed you were the one truly running this company. Now I have seen it with my own eyes. She tightened her grip slightly. Madam Chief Executive. Renata shook her hand. That same afternoon, the board formally appointed Renata Hayes as Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Meridian Holdings, in addition to her ownership of it. A title, at long last, to match the truth that had always been sitting underneath it. She accepted it from a chair in a room she had designed, with the cool light still coming through the tall windows, with her daughter at home in her grandmother's arms, with her oldest friend on one side of her and her oldest backer on the other. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to, a little, and she did not. What she felt was level. Steady. Exactly where she was meant to be, like a meridian, like the highest point the sun reaches in a day, certain and balanced and home. Chapter 10, The Ribbon. 7 months later, Hayes Meridian opened its newest property, a renovated building a block from a children's hospital, a calm and decent place for families to rest while a child they loved was sick and far from home. It was the same kind of place Renata had bought first, all those years ago, the first stone of everything that followed. She had wanted the newest one to be exactly the same kind, because some things you do not improve by making them grander. You improve them only by making them kinder, and she had built a whole company on knowing the difference. She had named the building the Yvonne, after her mother. The morning of the opening was bright and cool, a clear sky with no warmth she had to shade her eyes against, the kind of plain open light she had always liked because it let you see everything for what it was. A small crowd had gathered at the entrance, on the new clean sidewalk. Staff she had hired herself. Partners she had chosen to keep. Lenders who had stayed with the company because the founder had proven, in the worst year of her life, exactly the kind of person she was when everything went wrong at once. Camille was there in royal blue, talking fast and low with a developer about the next site, already 3 deals ahead, the way she always was. Harold was there, a little older, deeply pleased, the chair of a company that no longer had a single hole anywhere in it. Frances Okonkwo was there, because she now read every packet for a company she had come to believe in completely. Yvonne stood near the ribbon in a deep maroon dress that Renata had bought her for the day, holding Simone, who was 9 months old now and had her mother's steady dark eyes and a grip on the world like a signed contract. The baby reached out toward the bright wide ribbon strung across the doorway, and Yvonne let her close one small fist around the very end of it, and laughed out loud, a free and easy sound. Renata wore burgundy, a clean strong color, and flat shoes, because she would be on her feet the whole long day and she had no one left to impress and nothing left at all to prove. She stood at the front of the small crowd and looked up at the building with her mother's name carved over the door. Brandon was not there. He was somewhere across the country, she had heard secondhand, at a smaller firm, with a smaller title, telling a smaller version of the story in which he had built something great and then lost it unfairly to a woman who had simply been lucky. The people who knew the truth did not bother to correct him. The truth corrected itself, the way it always did in the end, in the records, where her name was, and his was not, and never had been. There was no man at the center of this day. There did not need to be one. The center of the day was a woman who had read all the numbers and not just the top line, a mother who had taught her how to do it in offices she cleaned at night, and a daughter who would grow up never once doubting that the chain had broken precisely where her mother had decided it would break. Renata picked up the oversized ceremonial scissors. She thought, briefly and without much weight, of a gray morning in a driveway, of a car window rising, of a man lifting 2 fingers off a steering wheel and driving calmly away from the most important thing he would ever have access to, certain in his bones that he was the most important person in his own life. He had forgotten whose name was on everything. She had not. She had never once forgotten it. "Thank you all for being here this morning," Renata said to the small bright crowd, and they quieted. This is the kind of place I built first, years ago, and it is the kind of place I am going to keep building. A place where tired people can rest when they need it most. My mother is the reason I know how to make one. My daughter is the reason I am never going to stop. She turned and looked at Yvonne and Simone. Yvonne lifted the baby's small hand and waved it at the crowd, and the crowd laughed, and the morning light fell on all three of them with nothing held back. Renata cut the ribbon. It parted cleanly and fell, bright and light, to the new sidewalk. She handed the heavy scissors to her mother. She took her daughter into her arms. And she walked into the building that carried her family's name, under a wide sky with no shadows in it anywhere, into a life that was, in every way the documents recorded and every way they never could, entirely and finally her own. END